great example of this is in Pro Tools. For anyone who's using Pro Tools for recording and stuff like that, one of the great plugins that they have available is a channel strip plugin, which I highly recommend you use when you are doing just sort of mixing stuff. Great plugin, very versatile, has everything you need on there. The reason it's called the channel strip because we have a channel full of several different applications. We refer to that as one channel. So when we have multiple different selections in your digital DAW, it's appropriate to call them essentially stems or individual channels that we have available. Just some sort of general terminology that is appropriate to use. So we look at the decks. The appropriate term to use is channel strip. We are looking at today a few different things going on. Let's have a look and then,
Take it on.
Apologies. The standard approach, when you're beginning is to take, a section of the end and then, take a section of another song after the beginning and then, you're blending them two together. Okay, standard stuff. For anyone that's starting out, I recommend starting with that. One example of taking that to the next sort of progression is taking a breakdown section of one and a build-up section of another, blending those two moments together. I find that the tricky part when you are doing something like, I don't know why I constantly have some sort of like reflux or something when I'm filming these ones. Anyway, because we're dealing with things becoming quite quiet, it's dissipating in one and it's dissipating in another one and you're blending it into the next one. What can happen is you can use the fader too early. They're called a fader for a reason. So you're fading out the track, you're fading it in. What can happen when you are using the channel? Now we're talking about the channel fade. We're not talking about the master sort of fade at the bottom that goes left and right. We're talking about the channel strip and the fader that you have on your channel. So it's essentially the volume fader. Okay, at the bottom. Now, we have, for just simplicity's sake, we have two channel strips. Okay, now the reason they're called channel strips is because we have multiple different things. We have your standard EQ, so you have your high, mids, and lows. You have your master volume at the top. Then you have your Q. Then you have your main fader for that channel. A great example of this is in Pro Tools. For anyone who's using Pro Tools for recording and stuff like that, one of the great plugins that they have available is a channel strip plugin, which I highly recommend you use when you are doing just sort of mixing stuff. Great plugin. Very versatile, has everything you need on there. The reason it's called the channel strip because we have a channel full of several different applications. We refer to that as one channel. So when we have multiple different selections in your digital DAW, it's appropriate to call them essentially stems or individual channels that we have available. Just some sort of general terminology that is appropriate to use. So we look at the decks. The appropriate term to use is channel strip. For this example, we say we have two, okay, and they both have their own faders. And what we want to do in this example is we're finishing with one and it's fading out and it's having a fade. It's not at the end of the song. This is where that progression from dealing with the sort of beginning approach where you are sort of fading out of one and bringing in other. The simplicity there is that once finishing, you don't have to worry about it so much and into the next one, and you can just remove it once it's ended. When you are doing something like this, you want to be careful with fading it out smoothly and musically with the next one. If you fade it out too early, you'll be essentially stuck with the next one. You can sometimes lose lose a mix. You have to be very careful. You cut out too early, nothing's really happening. It's very quiet. It's very difficult to do something when it's very quiet. There's only so much you can do. And you see in this example, even we are adding some effects to increase the level of the loudness because it's becoming very quiet. You just want to be careful when you're doing something like this. You can lose that mix. So that's something you just want to be mindful of. The next thing is you want to do it musically. Now, what does that mean? Okay, you want to be counting with the song. So 1, 2, 3, 2, 2, 2, and then as you're fading, you're bringing in gently the next one. One approach is to keep that main fader like we have right now. By itself, it's fading out from the first song. Okay, so we have the first song on channel 1, and we have the second one that's building up. Okay, and we're fading that in, but we're maintaining the current fader. Okay, we're not turning it down just yet. We're maintaining it, and we're bringing in the next piece. When you pass about halfway, I would say 50%, okay, of your second channel fader, when you bring it in, that's when you can start decreasing the first channel, the current song that's playing, and you want to gently start decreasing it, meet at about halfway, and then when you've sort of got to that sort of 50% mark, then you start changing. And you start bringing in the next song, you start fading out the other one. And that crossover point is what you want to be careful with, because you cut it out too early, then you're into the next one too early. And that just takes practice. You're switching over, add some effects, and then you're straight into it. Now, the ability to do that, adding effects and everything, that just takes time. The question is, common sort of thing would be, why don't you use the main one at the bottom so that goes left and right? I try to maintain that one in the center because it is quite flimsy. I'm not a huge fan of it. It's happened to me a few times on my suit jacket, would just flick it to one side. It's okay. I would prefer that it has a bit of a lock function. Thankfully, the individual channels, you're able to adjust them so they can be left or right. I keep those in the center so that I have full control over them. If you prefer using the bottom fader left and right, just be mindful it is a bit flimsy. You can do this approach from left to right. It's just, so it's flexible. I don't find it as musical. So you just want to be mindful of that.